What if an entire civilization, more advanced than ours, vanished in a single day? A city of gold and crystal, where technology and nature existed in perfect harmony. Then the gods got angry. The earth shook, the sea rose, and in 24 hours, it was gone. Tonight, Atlantis, the greatest mystery in human history. Did it exist? And what really happened on that final, terrible night? Close your eyes and travel back, way back, to a time when the world was younger, when gods walked among mortals, when magic and reality blurred together. This is where our story begins, not with Atlantis itself, but with how it came to be. The world had just been divided among the gods. Zeus took the sky and became king of Olympus. Hades descended into the underworld to rule the dead, and Poseidon, god of the sea, earthquakes, and horses, received dominion over all the oceans. But Poseidon wanted more than just water. He wanted land. He wanted a kingdom he could shape, a place to call his own. So Poseidon explored the vast oceans, searching. He traveled beyond the Pillars of Hercules, what we now call the Strait of Gibraltar, into the great Atlantic Ocean. And there, in the middle of that endless blue, he found it. An island. Not just any island, but a paradise. Fertile soil, abundant fresh water, perfect climate, mountains rich with minerals, forests full of game. This island had everything. The island was uninhabited except for a small community living near a mountain at its center, and among these people lived a young woman named Cleito. She was beautiful, not just physically, but in spirit. She understood the rhythms of nature, respected the land, lived in harmony with everything around her. Poseidon saw her and fell in love. Not the shallow infatuation of mortals, but the deep, eternal love of an immortal who had finally found someone worthy of his devotion. He appeared to her, not as a terrifying god, but as someone gentle, someone she could love in return. And miraculously, she did. But Poseidon faced a problem. Cleito was mortal, fragile, vulnerable. Other gods might be jealous. Mortals might seek to harm her, to strike at him. Pirates and raiders could threaten her. How could he protect the woman he loved? So Poseidon did what gods do. He reshaped reality itself. He took the mountain where Cleito lived and carved it into a perfect fortress. He created alternating rings of land and water around the central hill. 3 rings of water, 2 rings of land, all perfectly circular, all perfectly concentric. Each ring of land was exactly the same width. Each ring of water was exactly the same depth. The symmetry was divine, literally. The rings weren't just defensive barriers. Poseidon filled the water rings with sea creatures under his command. He made the land rings fertile beyond anything natural. He created channels connecting the water rings to the ocean, but only he could navigate them safely. Anyone else attempting it would be lost in supernatural currents. At the center, on the original mountaintop, Poseidon built a palace, not made by mortal hands, but shaped by divine will. The walls were covered in a metal that doesn't exist anymore. The Greeks called it orichalcum. It glowed with an inner fire, red and gold, brighter than copper but softer than gold. The palace blazed like a second sun, visible for miles. Here, Poseidon and Cleito lived and loved, and from their union came children, 5 sets of twins, 10 sons total. These weren't entirely mortal. They carried divine blood, the heritage of Poseidon himself. They were stronger, wiser, longer lived than ordinary humans. They were demigods, though not quite immortal. When the 10 sons reached adulthood, Poseidon divided the island among them. The eldest, Atlas, received the central portion, the ringed city his father had created, and the lands immediately around it. Atlas became the first king of what would be called Atlantis, named after him. The other 9 brothers received territories across the island, each becoming a king in his own right, but all acknowledging Atlas as the High King. Poseidon established laws for his sons and their descendants. They must rule justly. They must respect the land that fed them. They must honor the gods, especially their divine father. They must never war against each other. The 10 kingdoms of Atlantis must remain united. And above all, they must remember that their power came from divine blood, and that blood carried responsibilities, not just privileges. For generations, Poseidon's descendants obeyed these laws. The divine blood was strong in them. They remembered where they came from. They ruled with wisdom and justice. They developed the island, but carefully, always in harmony with nature. They built, but beautifully. They grew powerful, but used that power responsibly. The island flourished. The alternating rings of land and water became not just fortifications, but the framework for an incredible city. Bridges connected the land rings, allowing movement while maintaining defense. The water rings became harbors for an expanding fleet. The central island, largest and highest, became the heart of a civilization unlike anything the world had ever seen. But this is where our story really begins. Because the divine blood that made Atlantis great would eventually be its downfall. The sons of Poseidon married mortal women. Their children married mortals. And each generation, the divine heritage diluted slightly. The wisdom faded. The sense of responsibility weakened. The memory of divine origins became myth, then legend, then barely remembered story. And as the divine blood thinned, human nature asserted itself. Pride, greed, ambition. The very qualities that gods lacked because they were beyond such things, but which mortals could never escape. The descendants of Poseidon were becoming more human and less divine with each passing generation. They still ruled Atlantis. They still wielded the technologies and knowledge their godlike ancestors had developed. But they were forgetting why they had these gifts. They were starting to think they deserved power because of their greatness, not as a sacred trust from Poseidon. The stage was set. Atlantis stood at its height, wealthy, powerful, advanced beyond any other civilization. Its ships sailed every ocean. Its influence extended across known world. Its capital city was the most magnificent place on earth. But the seeds of destruction were already planted, not in external enemies or natural disasters, but in the hearts of Atlantis's own rulers, who were becoming more human every day. This is how it began, not with disaster, but with divine love, not with catastrophe, but with paradise. The story of Atlantis is the story of how even the greatest gifts, given by gods themselves, can be destroyed by human nature. How perfection is always temporary. How nothing, not even a civilization blessed by the gods, lasts forever. And now, as you drift toward sleep, imagine that ringed city in its earliest days. Perfect circles of blue water and green land. The palace at the center glowing like a captured sun. Poseidon walking the shores with Cleito, planning the paradise they would create. The 10 princes being born, each carrying the divine spark. Everything possible, everything perfect, everything doomed, though none of them knew it yet. Now picture the city itself, because Atlantis wasn't just any city. It was architecture made philosophy, engineering made art,
human ambition made real in stone and metal and crystal. The basic structure came from Poseidon's original design, those alternating rings of land and water. But what his descendants did with that foundation was remarkable. They took a defensive fortification and transformed it into the most beautiful city ever built. Start from the outside and work inward.
The outermost ring of water connected directly to the ocean through a channel wide enough for the largest ships. This was the commercial harbor, always bustling with vessels from every corner of the known world. Egyptian grain ships, Phoenician traders, Greek merchants. Ships from lands so distant, their names are lost to history. All coming to Atlantis to trade, to marvel, to pay tribute to the greatest city on Earth. The channel through which ships entered wasn't natural. It was carved through solid rock, 50 feet wide and deep enough for any vessel. The channel walls were lined with that mysterious metal, orichalcum, which glowed perpetually with inner fire. Sailing into Atlantis at night, you'd see this glowing pathway leading you to the harbor, like a river of captured sunset. The first land ring was dedicated to the common people, though common in Atlantis meant something different than elsewhere. Housing wasn't the cramped, dirty tenements of ancient cities. Atlanteans had mastered city planning. Buildings were spaced for light and air. Streets were paved and cleaned regularly. Aqueducts brought fresh water from mountain springs. Sewers, actual underground sewers, carried waste away to treatment facilities. This was Roman engineering 1,000 years before Rome existed. The homes themselves were beautiful. Not just the rich, everyone in Atlantis lived well. Walls were whitewashed or painted in colors extracted from plants and minerals. Many homes had small gardens or courtyards. Windows had glass, actual, transparent glass, another technology they'd mastered. Light filled every room. Fresh air circulated. Compare this to Bronze Age housing anywhere else. Dark, cramped, smoky holes in the ground, and you understand why Atlantis seemed magical. The second water ring was both defensive moat and pleasure zone. Atlanteans loved water. Natural, given their divine ancestry. This ring had floating gardens, pleasure boats, swimming areas, and dolphins, sacred to Poseidon, played in the waters, friendly and unafraid. Children would swim with them. The water was kept pristinely clean through a filtration system we still don't fully understand. Something involving sand, charcoal, and crystalline minerals. The second land ring housed the wealthy merchants, the artisans, the educated class. Here the buildings grew larger, more elaborate. Private libraries, workshop studios, small temples to various gods. This ring also contained the gymnasia, training facilities for athletic competitions, and the academies where Atlantean children learned mathematics, astronomy, music, philosophy, and the practical skills of navigation and engineering. Education in Atlantis was universal. Every child, regardless of birth, received education. The Atlanteans understood something most ancient civilizations didn't: that human potential exists in everyone, not just the elite. They couldn't afford to waste talent, so they found it everywhere, developed it, used it. This wasn't idealism, it was pragmatism. The most advanced civilization on Earth needed the best minds, regardless of where they were born. The third water ring was sacred. Only priests and royalty could sail its waters. Here were kept the holiest relics of Poseidon's original gifts to Plato, objects of divine origin that still retained power. The water itself was considered blessed. Sick people would be brought to bathe in it, hoping for miraculous cures. Some were cured, whether by divine power, mineral content, or belief, who can say? The innermost land ring was the royal district. Here lived the 10 royal families, the direct descendants of Atlas and his 9 brothers. 10 palaces, each magnificent, though none could match the central temple palace on the island in the middle. These palaces weren't just residences. They were centers of governance, art, science. Each royal family specialized in different knowledge. One family mastered medicine, another astronomy, another agriculture. They weren't just rulers, they were guardians of specific knowledge domains, ensuring nothing was lost, constantly advancing their fields. The architecture of these palaces would be impossible today. Walls inlaid with gold, silver, copper, and that glowing orichalcum. But not garishly. The Atlanteans understood restraint. The metals formed patterns, geometries, images of nature. A wall might show a school of fish rendered in silver against azure tiles. Another might show stars and planets in their courses, mapped more accurately than any other ancient civilization managed. The roofs were domed, another engineering feat. Some domes were covered in ivory, not valuable for being ivory, but for being white, reflecting sunlight, keeping buildings cool. Other roofs used a transparent crystal material, not glass, something else, that let light through while blocking rain. Imagine sunlight filtered through crystal, filling rooms with rainbows. And at the center, on the original hill Poseidon had carved into rings, stood the great temple palace. This was the heart of Atlantis, the throne of the High King, the temple to Poseidon himself. The temple was columned, hundreds of pillars of marble and orichalcum alternating, creating a forest of stone and glowing metal. The ceiling was inlaid with gold and ivory, showing the sky, with each visible star in its proper position. Astronomers could use the temple ceiling as a map of the heavens. Inside stood a statue of Poseidon so large you had to crane your neck to see his face. The god was shown standing in a chariot, pulled by 6 winged horses, reaching almost to the ceiling. The statue was made of gold and ivory, covered in precious stones. Poseidon's trident was held high, and atop it burned an eternal flame, blue fire that never dimmed, never needed fuel, burning day and night for centuries. This wasn't just artistry. The Atlanteans believed the statue contained a fragment of Poseidon's actual presence, that their divine ancestor could see through the statue's eyes, hear prayers spoken before it, watch over his descendants. Whether this was true or not, the Atlanteans believed it absolutely. Around the temple stood the throne room, council chambers, treasury, archives. The palace was city and temple combined. Here, the 10 kings would gather to make decisions affecting all Atlantis. They would sacrifice bulls to Poseidon, not cruel, but sacred, honoring the god who gave them everything. The whole city was connected by canals, bridges, and underground tunnels. You could travel from the outermost ring to the central island entirely by water if you wished, or entirely by underground passage if you preferred. The engineering was sophisticated beyond anything that would exist for the next 2,000 years. And everywhere, water. Fountains in every square, aqueducts bringing cold mountain water and hot springs from volcanic depths. Public baths where citizens could socialize while bathing in water of different temperatures. The sound of running water was Atlantis's constant music, reminding everyone of Poseidon's gift, of their oceanic heritage. Gardens grew everywhere, not wild, but carefully cultivated. Trees from distant lands, flowers of every color and season. The Atlanteans had mastered something like greenhouses, growing tropical flowers in winter, preserving delicate plants through any weather. The scent of flowers was Atlantis's perfume, mixing with salt air and the faint metallic smell of orichalcum. At night, the city glowed.
Crystals powered by some energy we've lost captured sunlight during the day and released it at night. Streets never darkened. The water rings reflected light, creating paths of silver. The central palace blazed like a beacon. From miles at sea, sailors could see Atlantis glowing on the horizon, like a star fallen to earth. This was Atlantis at its height. A city where 100,000 people lived in comfort unknown anywhere else.
Where art and science flourished together. Where the poorest citizen lived better than kings elsewhere. Where human potential reached its fullest expression, aided by half-remembered divine knowledge. Perfect. Beautiful. Doomed. Because even this perfection held the seeds of destruction. The very comfort and plenty that made Atlantis great would make its people forget what their ancestors knew. That power demands responsibility. That gifts require gratitude. That even divine blood doesn't make you immortal or immune to the consequences of pride. What was it like to actually live in Atlantis? Not as royalty, but as an ordinary citizen in this extraordinary place. Because that's what made Atlantis truly remarkable. Even common people lived in ways that would seem miraculous to us today. Wake up in your Atlantean home. Sunlight streams through glass windows. Real glass, clear and clean, not the murky stuff that would pass for glass in medieval Europe. Your room is spacious, clean, airy. The floor is tiled in geometric patterns, cool to your feet. You walk to a basin and turn a tap. Yes, running water in every home, and wash your face in clean, cold water, piped from mountain springs. You dress in clean clothes. Atlantean textiles were famous. Linen woven so fine it felt like silk, dyed in colors other civilizations couldn't produce. Purple from murex shells, but also blues, greens, reds created through chemical processes they'd mastered. Your clothes aren't a mark of status. Everyone dressed well in Atlantis. The differences were subtle, a matter of taste rather than wealth. Breakfast. Bread from wheat grown in the island's fertile interior. Fruit from the orchards, apples, pears, citrus fruits brought from distant lands and successfully cultivated here. Cheese from sheep and goats. Honey. Fish from the rings and the ocean beyond. Nobody in Atlantis went hungry. The combination of fertile soil, advanced agriculture, and trade wealth meant food abundance, but more than abundance, variety. Atlantean merchants traded across the known world. Spices from the east, wine from the Mediterranean, exotic fruits from Africa. Atlanteans ate better than royalty elsewhere, and this was just a normal breakfast. After eating, you head to your workplace. Atlantis wasn't a slave society. They had servants, yes, but not slaves in the brutal sense Rome would later practice. Work was valued. Everyone contributed. The society ran on cooperation and specialization, not forced labor. Maybe you're an artisan. You work in a studio in the second ring, creating the beautiful objects Atlantis was famous for. You might be a potter, sculptor, jeweler, painter. Your work isn't just survival, it's creation. Atlanteans valued beauty for its own sake. Art wasn't a luxury for the rich. It was a part of daily life for everyone. Or maybe you're an engineer, maintaining the aqueducts, the filtration systems, the crystalline lights. Atlantean technology was sophisticated beyond anything that would exist for millennia. They had mechanical devices we'd recognize as clockwork, using gears and springs. They understood hydraulics, using water pressure to power machines. They discovered principles of leverage and pulley systems that wouldn't be rediscovered until the Renaissance. The crystal technology was particularly advanced. They'd discovered, or been taught by their divine ancestors, how to store energy in certain crystalline structures. Some light absorbed during the day would be released at night as cool, steady illumination. Larger crystals could store enough energy to power mechanical devices. The exact science is lost, but descriptions suggest something like batteries or capacitors, using crystals instead of chemical reactions. Or perhaps you're a scholar, working in one of the academies. Atlantean knowledge was extensive. They'd mapped the stars with precision that wouldn't be matched until telescopes were invented. They understood that Earth was round. They'd sailed far enough to see the evidence. They'd calculated the year's length to within minutes of accuracy. They studied mathematics, not just for practical purposes, but for its own beauty. Medicine in Atlantis was advanced. They understood that cleanliness prevented disease. That's why their cities had sewers and clean water. They discovered that certain plants had healing properties and had systematically tested and catalogued hundreds of medicinal herbs. They performed surgery, using tools that wouldn't look unfamiliar to modern doctors. Mortality rates were low. People lived longer, healthier lives than anywhere else. At midday, you might visit the public baths. Bathing in Atlantis was social, recreational, and therapeutic. The baths had hot pools, cold pools, steam rooms, exercise areas. Citizens would gather, bathe, talk, exercise, socialize. Class differences dissolved in the baths. Merchants conversed with scholars, artisans with priests. The baths were democracy in action, everyone equal in their nudity and cleanliness. The Atlanteans understood something profound about water. It wasn't just for drinking and bathing. It was spiritual, healing, connecting. Their Poseidon ancestry made them lovers of water in all its forms. Swimming was universal. Every child learned. The water rings were used for pleasure as much as defense. Boats glided across them, not for war or trade, but for the joy of being on water. Music filled the city. Atlanteans loved music, considering it a gift from the gods. Street musicians played. Formal concerts occurred in amphitheaters. Music theory was taught to all children. The Atlanteans had developed complex harmonies and scales that would later be forgotten and slowly rediscovered. Their instruments, stringed, wind, and percussion, produced sounds we might not recognize today. Athletics were important, but not competitive in the way the Greeks would later practice. Atlanteans exercised for health and beauty, not to prove superiority. They swam, ran, practiced combat skills, but as art forms, ways of perfecting the body. The ideal Atlantean was balanced, strong but not brutish, quick but not nervous, healthy but not obsessed with physical perfection. Evening brought leisure. You might attend philosophical discussions where scholars debated the nature of reality, ethics, the relationship between gods and humans. These weren't exclusive to the educated elite. Anyone could attend, ask questions, contribute. Atlantean democracy extended to ideas. Everyone's thoughts had potential value. Or you might attend theater. Atlantean drama was sophisticated, telling stories of their mythical past, exploring moral questions, providing entertainment and education simultaneously. The amphitheaters were architectural marvels with acoustics so perfect that someone speaking normally on stage could be heard clearly in the highest seats. As night fell, the crystal lights activated. The city glowed softly, safely lit without fire's danger. You'd walk home through illuminated streets, past fountains whose spray caught the light and created rainbows, past gardens where night-blooming flowers released their scent, past temples where priests sang evening hymns to the gods. At home, you might read. Yes, read. Atlanteans were literate.
They'd developed a phonetic alphabet, making reading and writing accessible to all. Libraries were public. Books, written on treated leather, papyrus, or something like vellum, were available. Knowledge wasn't hoarded, it was shared. Your children would be asleep already, tired from a day of learning and play. Atlantean childhood was valued. Children weren't miniature adults forced into labor. They learned through play, exploration, guided instruction. They were protected, cherished, prepared for adult life gradually. You'd fall asleep in a comfortable bed, in a clean home, in a safe city.
In the greatest civilization Earth had ever seen. Tomorrow would bring more work, but work with purpose. More learning, because knowledge was endless. More creation, because humans were made to create. More community, because Atlanteans understood that humans were social creatures who thrived through cooperation. This was life in Atlantis. Not perfect, no human society is perfect. There were disputes, disappointments, sorrows. But there was also prosperity, beauty, knowledge, community. There was the constant awareness of living in something special, something unprecedented, something blessed by gods. And there was the tragic blindness that comes from comfort. When life is good, you assume it will always be good. When you're powerful, you forget that power can be lost. When you're blessed by gods, you forget that gods can withdraw their blessings. The Atlanteans lived in paradise and assumed paradise was permanent. They forgot that their divine ancestor had given them gifts that came with responsibilities. They forgot that the prosperity surrounding them wasn't natural or guaranteed. They forgot to be grateful. And in forgetting, they set themselves on the path to destruction. But they didn't know it yet. Tonight, as you imagine yourself falling asleep in that comfortable Atlantean home, the future still seems bright, permanent, blessed. The catastrophe hasn't happened yet. In this moment, Atlantis is still perfect, still immortal, still the greatest achievement of human civilization. Sleep well, imaginary Atlantean. Tomorrow the sun will rise over your beautiful city, reflected in the water rings, illuminating the golden temple. But the tomorrows are numbered now, though you don't know it. The divine blood is thin, the old wisdom is forgotten, and the gods are beginning to notice. Atlantis wasn't just a city, it was an empire. And that empire was built on one simple fact. The Atlanteans were the greatest sailors the world had ever seen. Think about their advantages. Descended from Poseidon, god of the sea, living on an island surrounded by water, raised in a culture that valued swimming as much as walking. The ocean wasn't something to be feared. It was home, heritage, highway. The Atlantean Navy was legendary even to them. They built ships using woods from their forests and metals from their mines, but also incorporating knowledge that seemed almost supernatural. Their ships were fast, faster than anything else on the water. They were strong, able to withstand storms that would destroy other vessels. They were large. Some merchant ships could carry cargo that would require dozens of normal ships. How did they build such vessels? Part of it was mathematics. The Atlanteans understood principles of hydrodynamics that other civilizations wouldn't grasp for millennia. They knew how to shape hulls for maximum speed and stability. They knew where to place keels for best balance. They understood that weight distribution affected handling. Part of it was materials. That mysterious orichalcum wasn't just decorative. Its properties, lighter than iron but stronger than bronze, made it perfect for ship fittings. Atlantean vessels had orichalcum-reinforced keels that could withstand impacts that would split ordinary ships, orichalcum cables that wouldn't rust or fray, tools and weapons that held edges indefinitely. And part of it was simply skill, passed from generation to generation. Atlantean children grew up on boats.
They learned to read winds and currents before they could read words. They understood the ocean's moods intuitively. Sailing wasn't a profession, it was culture. The Atlantean fleet controlled the known world's sea lanes, not through force, though they could fight when necessary, but through simple dominance. Their ships were faster, so they got there first. Their ships were bigger, so they carried more cargo. Their ships were more reliable, so merchants trusted them.
Every port in the Mediterranean knew Atlantean vessels. In Egypt, they were welcomed, their trade goods prized. In Greece, they were admired and somewhat feared. In Phoenicia, they were rivals but respected ones. In places without names anymore, along African coasts and European shores, Atlantean ships appeared like magic, bringing goods from impossible distances. What did Atlantis trade? Everything. But their most valuable exports weren't material. They exported knowledge. Atlantean navigators understood something critical. Knowledge of routes, currents, seasonal winds, and safe harbors was more valuable than any cargo. So they mapped, obsessively. Every Atlantean ship captain kept detailed logs of voyages, water depths, coastal features, wind patterns, star positions. These logs were compiled, studied, updated. The great library of Atlantis contained the most complete collection of geographical knowledge on Earth. And they shared it. Not freely, they weren't fools, but for a price. Want to know the safe route to tin mines in Britain? Hire an Atlantean navigator. Want to trade with mysterious lands beyond the Mediterranean? An Atlantean pilot will guide you. This knowledge economy made Atlantis wealthy beyond simple trade goods. They also exported technology. Atlantean shipwrights would build vessels for foreign powers, for a price. Atlantean engineers would design harbors, for a fee. Atlantean architects would plan cities, if you could afford them. They didn't hoard knowledge jealously. They monetized it brilliantly. The Atlantean colonies spread across the known world. Not conquests in the brutal sense, but trading posts, settlements, outposts. Atlantean communities existed in hundreds of locations, each maintaining connection with the homeland. These weren't independent city-states. They remained loyal to Atlantis, sending tribute, following Atlantean law, maintaining Atlantean culture. Why? Because being part of the Atlantean network brought benefits: protection from pirates and rivals, access to Atlantean trade goods, connection to Atlantean knowledge. A colony might start as a dozen families sent to establish a trading post. Within generations, it would be a thriving city, distinctly Atlantean in character, but adapted to local conditions. Some scholars believe Atlantean influence reached far beyond the Mediterranean. There are strange similarities between Atlantean descriptions and archaeological mysteries worldwide. Step pyramids in Egypt, Mexico, and Cambodia. Could Atlantean architects have influenced all three? Sophisticated megalithic construction in Peru, Easter Island, and Malta. Did they learn from Atlantean engineers? This is speculation, but consider. The Atlanteans were master sailors, with ships capable of oceanic voyages. They lived before most ancient civilizations recorded histories. They had knowledge and technology that seemed magical. If any ancient civilization could have circumnavigated the globe, it was Atlantis. The Atlantean harbor was the commercial heart of the ancient world. Every day, dozens of ships arrived. Grain from Egypt, wine from Greece, timber from Lebanon, tin from Britain, amber from the Baltic, ivory from Africa, spices from mysterious eastern lands. The cargo was inventoried, stored in massive warehouses, then redistributed to wherever demand existed. But the harbor wasn't just commercial. It was the Atlantean military's base. The war fleet, distinct from merchant vessels, was kept ready for instant deployment. These ships were sleeker, faster, more heavily armed. They carried Atlantean marines trained in shipboard combat. They projected power across the seas. The Atlanteans didn't conquer for conquest's sake. They weren't interested in ruling vast land empires. But they demanded respect for their merchant vessels. Pirates who attacked Atlantean ships died, hunted down by war fleets that were faster and better commanded than anything pirates could field. City-states that seized Atlantean property faced blockades that strangled their trade. The message was clear: trade with Atlantis fairly, or don't trade at all. This made Atlantis wealthy beyond imagining. Gold and silver flowed in from dozens of sources: precious gems, rare materials, exotic goods. But wealth wasn't the goal, it was a side effect. The goal was what wealth could buy: security, comfort, leisure for learning, resources for art and science. The Atlanteans understood that money itself was meaningless. It was what money enabled that mattered. The 10 royal families each controlled aspects of this commercial empire. One family specialized in grain trade, ensuring Atlantis and its colonies never faced famine. Another controlled the metal trade, crucial for tools and weapons. Another managed the luxury goods trade. Another oversaw shipbuilding. The division was systematic, preventing any one family from dominating while ensuring no critical function was neglected. But the empire carried a hidden cost. Success bred arrogance. When you dominate every sea, when every port pays you respect or tribute, when your ships go everywhere and no one can stop them, you start thinking you're invincible. You start believing your success comes from superiority rather than the gifts your ancestors received from a god. The divine blood that made Atlantis great was thinning. Each generation married mortals. The godlike wisdom faded. The innate understanding of the sea became learned skill rather than inherited instinct. The connection to Poseidon weakened until it was more tradition than reality. And as the divine heritage faded, human pride grew. The Atlanteans stopped being grateful for their advantages and started thinking they deserved them. Stopped seeing themselves as stewards of divine gifts and started seeing themselves as naturally superior beings. Stopped respecting the gods who had given them everything. This shift was subtle. No one woke up one day and decided to become arrogant. It happened slowly, over generations. Great-great-grandparents who remembered the divine origins passed on. Their stories became legends. Legends became myths. Myths became just old stories nobody quite believed anymore. The younger Atlanteans still performed the rituals, still sacrificed bulls to Poseidon, still maintained the temples. But it was empty ceremony now, not living faith. They did it because it was tradition, not because they believed their divine ancestor was watching and judging. The empire continued expanding. Atlantean ships sailed farther, discovered new lands, established more colonies. The wealth continued flowing in. The city continued growing, more beautiful, more advanced. Everything seemed perfect. Everything suggested permanent success. But empires built on divine favor without gratitude for that favor are castles built on sand. The foundation was eroding. The gods were watching. And Poseidon, looking through the eyes of his statue in the central temple, saw that his descendants had forgotten him, forgotten their origins, forgotten that they were blessed, not superior. The greatest naval empire the world had ever seen was approaching its end. The seas that had made Atlantis great would soon become its grave. But the Atlanteans didn't know this. They couldn't imagine their power fading. They'd controlled the seas for so many generations that they thought it was natural law, not divine gift. They were wrong. And they were about to learn exactly how wrong, in the most terrible way imaginable. Something was changing in Atlantis. You couldn't point to a specific moment when it started. There was no declaration, no obvious transformation. But slowly, generation by generation, the Atlanteans were becoming different people. The change started in the royal families, but spread throughout society. It began with the thinning of divine blood, as the descendants of Poseidon married mortals. Each generation, the godlike qualities diluted slightly. Longer lives became normal lifespans. Innate wisdom became learned knowledge. The connection to the divine faded into memory, then legend, then barely believed myth. But the real corruption wasn't biological. It was spiritual. Remember how Atlantis began? With abundance, fertile land, perfect climate, access to knowledge and technology beyond other civilizations, wealth flowing in from trade, every advantage possible. The early Atlanteans had been grateful for these gifts. They understood they were blessed by Poseidon and worked to deserve that blessing through wisdom, justice, and respect for the balance between civilization and nature. But gratitude is hard to maintain across generations. The great-grandchildren of the first blessed Atlanteans had never known hardship. They were born into abundance, grew up in the most advanced civilization on Earth. Their comfort and prosperity seemed natural, not miraculous. They forgot that none of it would exist without Poseidon's gifts. The shift happened slowly. Pride replaced gratitude. Entitlement replaced humility. The Atlanteans started believing they were superior not because of divine heritage, but because of inherent greatness. They started looking at other civilizations not as partners in trade, but as inferiors to be dominated. The 10 royal families were the worst. Their power had once been understood as stewardship. They were caretakers of territories Poseidon had granted. But later generations thought of themselves as rulers by right, superior beings whose commands should be obeyed without question. The corruption manifested in small ways at first. A merchant cheating a foreign trader. A diplomat speaking harshly to foreign ambassadors. A ship captain using force when negotiation would have worked. Each incident was minor, explicable, forgettable. But they accumulated, forming a pattern. The Atlanteans started seeing their military might as a tool for domination rather than protection. Why negotiate with foreign powers as equals when you could simply take what you wanted? Why trade fairly when you could extract tribute? Why show respect when you could demand submission? Expeditions that had been exploratory became invasions. Colonies that had been trading posts became occupying forces. Relationships that had been mutual became exploitative. Slowly, Atlantis was transforming from a commercial empire into a conquering one. The technology that had been used to improve life started being weaponized. The Atlanteans had always had armies and navies. Every civilization needs defense. But now they were developing weapons specifically designed for conquest. Ships built not just to sail fast, but to ram and sink others. Weapons using principles of engineering and metallurgy to maximize lethality. Siege equipment capable of breaking fortifications. Some of their weapons sound almost science-fictional. Descriptions mention metal devices that could focus sunlight into beams capable of igniting wood at a distance. Essentially, crude lasers using mirrors and lenses. Acoustic weapons that used sound waves to disorient enemies. Chemical weapons using noxious substances that would incapacitate but not permanently harm.
until they refined them into more lethal versions. Whether these descriptions are accurate or exaggerated, they indicate that Atlantis was devoting its considerable intellectual resources to military advancement. The same minds that had developed clean water systems and crystal lighting were now designing ways to kill more efficiently. The change affected culture, too. Atlantean art had been beautiful, celebrating nature, human achievement, the gods. New art became aggressive, celebrating conquest, depicting subjugated enemies, glorifying military power. Plays that had explored ethical questions became propaganda, justifying Atlantean supremacy.
Music that had been harmonious became martial. Philosophy shifted from questions of balance and justice to rationalization of domination. Atlantean philosophers started arguing that their civilization's superiority gave them not just the right, but the obligation to rule over lesser peoples. That they were doing conquered civilizations a favor by bringing them Atlantean order and knowledge. The exact arguments every empire uses to justify imperialism. Even religion changed. The rituals remained, the bulls were still sacrificed, the hymns still sung, the temples still maintained. But the meaning drained away. Poseidon was still worshipped, but as distant tradition rather than present reality. The other gods were honored but not feared. The Atlanteans were becoming functionally secular while maintaining religious forms. Some Atlanteans resisted these changes. Priests who remembered the old ways spoke against the corruption. Philosophers who valued the ancient wisdom argued for return to traditional values. Common citizens who felt uncomfortable with Atlantean aggressiveness voiced concerns. But they were shouted down, called weak, accused of holding Atlantis back. The momentum toward corruption was strong, and resistance was labeled treasonous. The very democracy that had been Atlantis's strength became a tool for enforcing conformity. Dissenters were outvoted, ostracized, silenced. The wealth that had once funded art, science, and public welfare was increasingly diverted to military spending. Grandiose projects designed more for display than function. Monuments to rulers rather than gods. The priorities were shifting from civilizational advancement to personal glorification. And the conquered peoples? They noticed. Rebellions started in distant colonies. Trade partners started avoiding Atlantean merchants when possible. Former allies became suspicious, then hostile. The network of relationships that had made Atlantis wealthy was fraying as the Atlanteans became less partners and more oppressors. The 10 royal families particularly embodied the corruption. They lived in increasing luxury, demanding more tribute from territories they controlled. They competed with each other in displays of wealth that would have shamed their ancestors. They schemed against each other for advantage, while the unity Poseidon had mandated dissolved into rivalry. Some royals took foreign partners, not from love, but for political alliance or to establish dominance over those partners' homelands. Some conquered foreign territories and declared themselves god kings, demanding worship from terrorized populations. The descendants of a god were becoming tyrants. The final corruption was the worst. The Atlanteans started thinking they didn't need the gods anymore, that their technology, their knowledge, their power made them equal to the immortals. Some even whispered, quietly at first, then louder, that they could surpass the gods. This was the ultimate arrogance. The Atlanteans had received everything from Poseidon, the island, the knowledge, the divine blood that made them capable of greatness. And now they were deciding that they had earned all of it themselves, that the gods were irrelevant, that Atlantean power was self-created. In the great temple, the eternal flame atop Poseidon's statue continued burning. The gold and ivory statue continued watching with painted eyes. But no one was watching back anymore. The prayers were rote. The sacrifices were ceremonial. The connection between divine ancestor and mortal descendants was severed, not by Poseidon abandoning them, but by them abandoning him. And in Olympus, the gods noticed. Zeus, king of the gods, looked down on Atlantis and saw a civilization blessed by divine favor, using those blessings for conquest and oppression. He saw humans who'd been given everything, acting like they deserved it. He saw the corruption of what should have been a paradise. Poseidon saw his descendants, diluted through generations of mortal blood, forgetting who they were and where they came from. Saw them using the gifts he'd given for purposes he'd never intended. Saw the beautiful island he'd shaped becoming the seat of an aggressive empire. The other gods saw humanity at its worst. Talented, intelligent, capable humans using those gifts for domination rather than creation. Saw what happens when divine blessings meet human ambition without divine wisdom to guide it. And the gods called council, because something had to be done. Atlantis was becoming a threat not just to other humans, but to the cosmic order. A civilization powerful enough to challenge gods needed to be reminded that no matter how advanced, how wealthy, how strong, humans were still mortal, still subject to divine law, still accountable for how they used the gifts they'd been given. The decision was made. Atlantis would be destroyed, not out of cruelty, but as cosmic justice, not to punish humanity, but to remind it of limits. The greatest civilization on Earth would fall, and fall in a way that would be remembered forever, a warning to future generations about the dangers of pride, the importance of gratitude, the consequences of forgetting that all human power is ultimately borrowed from forces greater than ourselves. The sentence was passed. The execution was coming. And Atlantis, arrogant in its power, had no idea what was about to happen. The meeting of the gods happened on Olympus, in Zeus's great hall, where the immortals gathered to decide the fates of mortals. All the major gods attended, not just Zeus and Poseidon, but Athena, Apollo, Artemis, Ares, Hephaestus, Aphrodite, Hermes, and the others. Even Hades emerged from the underworld for this judgment. Zeus spoke first, as was his right as king of the gods. His voice was thunder, his presence overwhelming even to the other immortals. "Behold Atlantis," he said, and with a gesture, he made the mortal world visible to all the gods, like looking through clear water to the bottom of a pool. They saw the city of rings, still beautiful, but now armed and aggressive. They saw the ships setting out not for trade, but for conquest. They saw foreign peoples subjugated, colonies exploited, wealth extracted through force. They saw the Atlanteans living in luxury, while those they dominated suffered. "This civilization was blessed by one of us," Zeus continued, looking at Poseidon. "Given advantages no other humans possessed. Divine blood, advanced knowledge, a perfect home. And what have they done with these gifts?" The gods could see the answer. The corruption was visible to divine eyes that could perceive not just actions, but intentions. The arrogance, the pride, the complete abandonment of gratitude toward the divine. The Atlanteans weren't just behaving badly. They'd lost the essential quality that makes humans worthy of divine favor: humility. Some gods argued for mercy. Athena, goddess of wisdom, pointed out that Atlantis had accomplished remarkable things: the art, the science, the architecture, These were worthy achievements. The early Atlanteans had been noble, she argued. Perhaps the current generation could be corrected, guided back to the right path. Apollo, god of knowledge and prophecy, noted that Atlantis had advanced human understanding considerably. Their astronomical observations, their mathematics, their navigation, these were gifts to all humanity, not just Atlantis. Destroying Atlantis would destroy knowledge that might take millennia to rediscover. But other gods argued for judgment. Ares, god of war, noted that Atlantis was becoming a military threat. Their weapons, their tactics, their aggressive expansion, they were dominating the human world through force. Left unchecked, they might eventually become dangerous even to the gods themselves. Poseidon sat silent through most of the debate. This was his creation, his gift, his bloodline. The corruption of Atlantis was, in some sense, his failure. He'd given his descendants everything, but hadn't ensured they'd remember where it came from. The dilution of divine blood was natural. He couldn't expect them to remain demigods forever. But the dilution of divine wisdom, of gratitude, of humility, that was a failure of stewardship. Finally, Poseidon spoke. They are my descendants, but they've forgotten me. They bear my blood, but they ignore my values. They rule the seas I gave them, but they desecrate those seas with piracy and conquest. I gave them a paradise, and they've transformed it into an empire of pride. He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of ocean depths. I do not defend them. They must be reminded that all power comes from higher sources, that human achievement without divine wisdom leads to destruction, that gifts, carelessly used, will be carelessly taken away. Zeus nodded. Then we are decided. Atlantis has been judged and found wanting. The question now is the method of correction. Ares suggested war, raising up enemies to defeat Atlantis in honest combat. But Athena argued that would reward Atlantis's military strength, give them martyrdom, make them heroes in defeat. Hera suggested plague or famine, allowing Atlantis to crumble slowly, demonstrating that even they couldn't escape human vulnerability. But Apollo argued that slow decline would be misinterpreted, blamed on bad luck rather than divine judgment. Finally, Poseidon spoke again. Let Atlantis end as dramatically as it began. Let the ocean that gave them life reclaim them. Let the island I raised from the sea return to it. Let their end be sudden, total, undeniable. Let future generations see what happens when humans forget the gods. Zeus considered this. You would destroy your own creation. End your bloodline. Not end, Poseidon replied. Some Atlanteans live in colonies far from the home island. They will survive, carry the knowledge, hopefully learn the lesson. But the seat of pride, the city of corruption? Yes. Let it sink. Let the waters I command swallow what I once raised up. Let Atlantis be remembered not as a triumph, but as a warning. The gods voted. The judgment was passed. Atlantis would be destroyed in a single day and night, erased so completely that future generations would doubt it ever existed. The method would be earthquakes and floods, Poseidon's elements, demonstrating clearly that this was divine action, not random catastrophe. But there would be warning, not because the gods were merciful, but because justice requires that. The Atlanteans would see the signs. They could repent, change, humble themselves before the gods. If they did, the judgment might be stayed. If they didn't,
if they remained proud and corrupt even in the face of divine warning, then destruction would come. Zeus lifted his hand, and lightning cracked across the Olympian sky. It is decided. Poseidon, your hand will destroy what your hand created. Let the mortals see that the gods are not mocked, that gifts carelessly used are gifts withdrawn. Let Atlantis fall. And in Atlantis, thousands of miles away, the first signs appeared. The weather changed. Atlantis had always enjoyed perfect climate, Poseidon's gift. But now clouds gathered, dark and heavy, blotting out the sun. Storms blew in from the ocean, more violent than anyone remembered. The crystal-clear skies turned gray, then black. The earth trembled. Small earthquakes at first, easy to dismiss, but they came more frequently, stronger each time. The Atlanteans, who'd never felt serious earthquakes in their blessed island, now felt the ground shift beneath their feet. The sea grew restless. Waves higher than normal crashed against the harbor walls. Tides varied unpredictably. The dolphins, Poseidon's sacred animals, fled the water rings and swam out to sea, refusing to return.
Animals often sense coming disaster before humans do. A few Atlanteans noticed. Priests who still honored the old ways felt divine disfavor. They urged prayer, sacrifice, repentance. They called for the people to return to the proper worship of Poseidon, to remember their divine origins, to humble themselves before the gods. But most Atlanteans dismissed the concerns. Bad weather happens. Earthquakes are natural phenomena. Dolphin behavior is unpredictable. These were just coincidences, nothing to worry about. Their technology, their knowledge, their power would protect them from any threat. They didn't need divine protection. They had human capability. Some even laughed at the priests' warnings. Superstitious foolishness, they said. The gods are myths. What happens on Earth has natural causes. We understand the world better than our ancestors with their divine fantasies. This is just weather, just geological activity. Nothing to fear. This reaction sealed Atlantis' fate. The gods had given warning. The Atlanteans had ignored it. Not from ignorance. They knew the warnings. They simply didn't believe, didn't care, didn't think divine judgment was real or relevant. On Olympus, Zeus watched this, saw the warnings dismissed, saw the pride continue unabated, saw the Atlanteans confident in their power, certain of their invulnerability, contemptuous of divine authority. They have chosen, Zeus said quietly. Then let judgment come. Poseidon stood, and his face was terrible to behold, not with rage, but with sorrow. A father about to destroy his children, a creator about to unmake his creation. But justice demanded it. The cosmic order required it. Atlantis had been tested and failed. The sentence would be executed. At dawn tomorrow, Poseidon declared, Atlantis will be no more. The island will sink. The city will drown. The empire will end. Let it be a lesson that echoes through all the ages of humanity. Let every civilization that comes after know. Divine gifts carry divine expectations. Pride before gods leads to destruction. No human power can stand against the will of heaven. The sun set on Atlantis for the last time. The Atlanteans went about their business, unaware that their world had mere hours left. In the palace, in the homes, in the streets, they lived their lives, confident in their power, certain of their future. But in the depths beneath the island, in the molten heart of the earth, Poseidon was preparing to reclaim what he had given. The earthquakes would intensify, the ocean would rise, and when the sun rose, if the sun could be seen through the storm, Atlantis would be gone. The night of judgment had come, and morning would bring catastrophe. The last day of Atlantis began like any other day. The sun rose, barely visible through the thick clouds that now perpetually covered the island, and the citizens woke to continue their lives, unaware these would be their final hours. In the palace, the High King performed his morning rituals, prayers to Poseidon, though his heart wasn't in them, just tradition, empty ceremony. Breakfast with his family, a review of the day's agenda with his advisors, plans for expanding trade, discussions about military expeditions to expand their colonies. Everything normal, everything routine, everything about to end. In the harbor, merchant ships prepared to sail. Captains checked cargo manifests, sailors loaded goods. The harbor master coordinated departures. A normal morning in the greatest port on Earth. Some ships managed to sail before catastrophe struck. They would survive to tell the story. Most wouldn't leave in time. In the academies, teachers prepared lessons. Students filed in, ready to learn astronomy, mathematics, navigation, philosophy. Knowledge that would die with them in a few hours. Some of this knowledge would be lost forever, rediscovered only centuries later, if at all. In workshops, artisans began their day's work, creating beauty that would be destroyed before sunset, making objects that would sink into mud and be lost for millennia. Their art, their skill, their passion, all about to be erased. In homes across the city, ordinary Atlanteans lived ordinary lives. Parents getting children ready for school, merchants opening their shops, guards changing shifts on the city walls, people arguing, laughing, loving, working. Humanity in all its mundane glory. Humanity that had no idea it was standing on the edge of oblivion. The warnings continued. The earthquakes grew stronger. Now even the skeptics couldn't ignore them. Buildings shook. Cracks appeared in walls. People felt uneasy. But still, they thought this was just natural phenomenon. Frightening, but not catastrophic. Their city was strong. Their technology was advanced. They would endure this like they'd endured everything else. Around midday, things escalated. A major earthquake struck, strong enough to topple some buildings, kill some people, create visible panic. The crystal lights in the streets shattered. Some of the canals cracked, water leaking into unexpected places. The ground literally moved beneath people's feet. Now people were scared. The streets filled with citizens asking what was happening. Officials tried to maintain order, gave reassuring statements. This was just a geological event. The city's engineers would assess the damage. Everything would be repaired. Everyone should return to their homes and remain calm. In the temple, the priests knew better. They prostrated themselves before Poseidon's statue, praying desperately. "Forgive us! We are sorry! Spare your city! Spare your children!" Some citizens joined them, finally recognizing divine disfavor. But most still didn't understand, or didn't want to understand. The afternoon brought horror. The earthquakes came continuously now, wave after wave. Buildings that had stood for centuries collapsed. The ground opened in places, swallowing people, homes, animals. The beautiful geometrical perfection of the city was being torn apart. The rings of land cracked and broke. Water flooded from the canals into places it shouldn't reach, and the sea grew angry. Waves that shouldn't be possible battered the outer harbor walls. The water in the rings churned and surged. Ships broke free from moorings and smashed into each other. The dolphins were long gone. The fish were swimming desperately toward open ocean. Every animal with instinct to sense disaster was fleeing. Only humans, proud in their reason, remained. The crystal technology began failing catastrophically. The energy storage systems, damaged by earthquakes, started releasing their power uncontrollably. Crystals exploded, sending shards flying like shrapnel. The steady light that had illuminated the city became deadly. Some explosions started fires. Others killed people nearby. The technology that had seemed magical was revealing its deadly potential. Evening brought true catastrophe. The sun, what could be seen of it through storm clouds, was setting. But this wasn't a normal sunset. The sky turned colors it shouldn't be. Sickly yellow-green, blood-red, purple-black. The clouds roiled and spun. Lightning cracked continuously, thunder a constant roar. This wasn't weather. This was the wrath of gods. The earthquakes reached a level beyond anything in human experience. Not just shaking, but violent lurching, the ground moving in waves like water. The entire island was undulating, rising and falling. The mountains at the center, the original hill Poseidon had carved into rings, were cracking apart, molten rock visible in the wounds. The volcanoes, dormant for generations, woke up. Not one, but several, erupting simultaneously. Lava fountained into the air. Ash began falling like dark snow, covering everything, making breathing difficult. The volcanic vents that the Atlanteans had cleverly used for heating and hot springs were now spewing poison gas. In the palace, the royal family finally understood. This wasn't natural disaster. This was divine judgment. The High King fell to his knees before Poseidon's statue, begging forgiveness. But it was too late. The statue, that great golden figure that had watched over Atlantis for generations, cracked and fell, crashing to the floor. The eternal flame finally extinguished. People ran through the streets in panic now. Where could they go? The harbor was chaos, ships trying to launch, most failing, some succeeding only to be swamped by enormous waves. The streets were blocked by collapsed buildings. The bridges connecting the rings were falling. There was nowhere safe. Some Atlanteans tried to use their technology to save themselves. Engineers attempted to activate emergency systems that would stabilize buildings. Sailors tried to get ships launched. Soldiers tried to maintain order. But all human capability was meaningless against divine wrath. The knowledge and skill that had made Atlantis great couldn't save it now. In the final hour, the worst came. The earthquakes reached a climax. The entire island was ripping apart. The ground itself was being torn asunder. The beautiful city of rings was breaking into pieces. Buildings fell like toys. The walls that had never needed to keep out enemies couldn't keep out the earth's fury. And then came the tsunami. Out at sea, the ocean floor had shifted violently, displaced massive amounts of water. A wave formed, not like normal waves, but a moving mountain of water, growing taller as it approached the island. Some estimates suggest it was 100 feet high, maybe more. A wall of water moving at impossible speed. The wave hit the outer harbor first, destroying everything instantly. Ships, docks, warehouses, all swept away like dust.
The wave continued inward, overwhelming the defensive rings that had never faced this kind of assault. Each ring of land was submerged, then swept clean of everything that had been on it. The water rings overflowed, merged, became one churning chaos. The wave reached the central island, the heart of Atlantis. The palace, the temple, the homes of the wealthy, all drowned. The great buildings that had taken generations to create were destroyed in seconds. Water filled every street, every room, every space. Thousands died in moments, drowned before they even understood what was happening. But the tsunami wasn't the end. As the wave receded, pulling people and debris back toward the sea, the island itself began sinking. The ground that Poseidon had raised from the ocean floor was returning to it. The earth opened and dropped. Buildings already damaged by earthquakes and tsunami now fell into cracks and chasms. The beautiful concentric rings were breaking apart, tilting, sliding into the ocean. The Atlanteans who had survived the earthquakes, the volcano, the tsunami, now faced the ultimate horror. The ground beneath their feet was disappearing. The island was sinking into the sea. Some tried to swim, but the churning water, full of debris and bodies, made survival nearly impossible. Some clung to floating wreckage, hoping to ride it out. Most simply vanished into the depths. The final scene of Atlantis was apocalyptic. Fire and water, earth and air, all in violent chaos. The most advanced civilization on Earth was being erased. The city of gold and crystal was becoming an underwater ruin. The empire that had controlled the seas was being swallowed by them. As the last light faded, whether from setting sun or from the darkness of catastrophe, Atlantis sank beneath the waves. The island that had been paradise, the city that had been perfect, the civilization that had been supreme, all gone in a single day and night, just as Zeus had decreed. The ocean surged over where the island had been, waves rolling and crashing. Then, gradually, the water calmed. The storm began to abate. The earthquakes stopped. And where Atlantis had stood, there was only ocean. Deep, dark, hiding the ruins beneath. The perfect city of rings was now an underwater graveyard. A few ships that had launched before the worst hit survived. They sailed back to where Atlantis should have been and found only water. The sailors couldn't believe it. An entire island gone. A massive city vanished. They searched desperately for survivors, finding a few clinging to debris. But of the 100,000 who had lived in Atlantis, only hundreds survived. And in Olympus, the gods watched. Not with pleasure, there's no joy in destruction, even deserved destruction, but with satisfaction that justice had been served, that a warning had been sent, that future civilizations would know. Humans are mortal. Power is temporary. Pride is dangerous. The gods are real, and their judgment is final. Atlantis was gone, but its story would live forever. The morning after Atlantis sank, the sun rose on an ocean that looked unchanged. But everything had changed. Ships arrived expecting to find the greatest harbor on Earth and found only empty water. Merchants waiting for Atlantean goods waited forever. Colonies that depended on the home island suddenly stood alone, confused and abandoned. The few hundred survivors who escaped on ships or clung to debris told impossible stories. An entire island sank in one day? A city of 100,000 people vanished. Nobody wanted to believe it.
but ships that sailed to investigate found only ocean where Atlantis should have been. Some claimed to see ruins beneath the waves, pillars and walls visible through clear water, but too deep to explore. The Atlantean colonies collapsed without their center. Some tried to continue as independent cities, claiming to be the true Atlantis. But without the home island, without the royal families, without the unifying power, they were just scattered settlements clinging to a dead empire's memory. Within a generation, the Atlantean network had dissolved completely. The knowledge was the greatest loss. Atlantis had possessed technology and understanding far beyond other civilizations. The great library sank with the city. The master engineers drowned. The crystal technology, the advanced architecture, the sophisticated navigation, most of it was lost forever. A few survivors tried to preserve what they remembered, teaching fragments to other cultures. This might explain mysterious advances in Egyptian mathematics, Phoenician navigation, and megalithic construction worldwide. Remnants of Atlantean knowledge scattered like seeds. The psychological impact echoed through generations. If Atlantis could fall, the greatest, most advanced, divinely blessed civilization, then anyone could fall. No one was safe. Some societies responded with increased religious devotion, trying to avoid Atlantis's fate by maintaining divine favor. Others drew different lessons, becoming more secular and self-reliant. The story entered mythology immediately. Different cultures told it differently. In Greece, it became a philosophical parable about corruption and divine justice. In Egypt, priests preserved it as historical memory. Everywhere, it became a warning about pride, a reminder of impermanence, a cautionary tale told to each new generation. The physical ruins remained, but inaccessible, lying under hundreds or thousands of feet of water. Ancient technology couldn't reach them. Sailors might glimpse shadows or structures on clear days, but they couldn't explore, couldn't recover, couldn't prove anything. This uncertainty allowed myth to flourish. Some said Atlantis hadn't truly been destroyed, but had been moved to another dimension. Others claimed survivors built a new Atlantis somewhere, hidden from the world. Within one generation, direct memory faded. Survivors aged and died. Their children knew only stories. Their grandchildren heard increasingly mythological tales. But somehow, the memory never died completely. Atlantis became more than history. It became a perpetual reminder that human achievement, however great, is always temporary, always vulnerable, always one catastrophe away from oblivion. For 3,000 years, humans have searched for Atlantis. The quest began with Plato, the Greek philosopher who recorded the story around 360 BC. He claimed Egyptian priests had preserved ancient records describing Atlantis in detail: the concentric rings, the advanced technology, the divine judgment. But was Plato recording history or creating philosophy? Scholars still debate whether Atlantis was real or an invented allegory about ideal government. Either way, Plato's account inspired obsession. The ancient Greeks searched for Atlantis. Some thought it might be Crete, where the Minoan civilization had been destroyed by volcanic eruption around 1600 BC. The Minoans had sophisticated cities and controlled sea trade, very Atlantis-like. Could the Thera eruption and resulting tsunamis be the source of the Atlantis story? During the Age of Exploration, some wondered if the Americas were Atlantis, an advanced civilization beyond Gibraltar, unknown to Europe. But the Americas were above water, not sunken,
and didn't match Plato's descriptions. The 19th century brought more systematic searching. Ignatius Donnelly's 1882 book, Atlantis, the Antediluvian World, argued that Atlantis was real and the source of all ancient civilization. His book lacked solid evidence but was hugely popular, sparking explosion of Atlantis theories, some scientific, some bizarre. Occultists claimed Atlanteans had psychic powers. Channelers received messages from dead Atlanteans. The search became an industry. Modern technology enabled new approaches. Sonar mapped ocean floors. Submersibles explored deep water. Various locations were proposed: the Bahamas, the Azores, the Mediterranean near Sardinia or Spain, off Cuba's coast. Every unusual underwater formation sparked speculation. Could this be Atlantis? The problem is scientific. We don't know exactly where to look. Plato said, beyond Gibraltar, which covers millions of square miles. We don't know what to look for. Ruins from a massive catastrophe would be shattered, scattered, buried under sediment. And plate tectonics doesn't support a large Atlantic island sinking 11,000 years ago. Most archaeologists are skeptical. No convincing evidence has been found. No artifacts with the right age and characteristics. No ruins matching descriptions. Atlantis was probably either invented by Plato or a distorted memory of the Minoan destruction. But the search continues. Why? Because Atlantis represents mystery, hope, and meaning. Mystery. It's the ultimate unsolved puzzle. Hope. That humanity once achieved greatness we've forgotten. That lost knowledge exists waiting to be rediscovered. Meaning. The story teaches profound lessons about pride, fall, and divine justice. Perhaps Atlantis should remain lost. Sometimes mysteries are more valuable unsolved. Sometimes paradise should stay a dream rather than a destination. The search itself, the longing, the hoping, the seeking, might be more important than finding. Atlantis lives forever in imagination, teaching lessons that wouldn't survive if it were just another archaeological site. The story of Atlantis carries profound lessons that echo across millennia. These aren't just ancient wisdom. They're warnings and guidance for every generation, including ours. The first lesson: pride destroys. The Atlanteans were blessed beyond measure. Divine ancestry, perfect location, advanced knowledge. They should have been grateful. Instead, they became arrogant, thinking they were great because they deserved it, not because they'd been given gifts. This pride led to corruption, conquest, and ultimately catastrophe. Remember, no matter how successful you become, your advantages came from somewhere. Gratitude and humility aren't weaknesses. They're recognition of reality. The second lesson: technology without wisdom is dangerous. The Atlanteans had incredible capabilities, but used them increasingly for domination and weapons. We face the same tension today with our own powerful technologies. Knowledge without wisdom, power without responsibility, capability without ethics. These create disaster. Progress must be moral as well as technological. The third lesson: nothing lasts forever. Atlantis seemed eternal, but ended in a day. All civilizations rise and fall. This is both depressing and liberating. Create beauty and achieve greatness not because it will last forever, but because it matters now. The value is in the achievement itself, not its permanence. The fourth lesson: comfort breeds complacency. The Atlanteans lived in paradise so long they took it for granted.
forgot that blessings require maintenance. Prosperity demands vigilance. Easy times shouldn't make you complacent, but grateful and careful. Paradise requires constant care to preserve. The fifth lesson: actions have consequences. The Atlanteans' corruption brought natural results. This isn't arbitrary divine punishment. It's reality operating according to principles. Systems that become unbalanced collapse. Societies that become unjust destroy themselves. Violate fundamental principles and suffer inevitable consequences. The sixth lesson: stories preserve truth. Whether Atlantis literally existed or not, the story teaches wisdom that treatises on pride and corruption never could. Myth carries truth. The most powerful stories survive because they capture something real about human experience. The final lesson: achieve despite impermanence. Atlantis proved humans can create incredible things. Paradise is possible, even if temporary. The Atlanteans' fall doesn't erase their glory. Both are part of the same story. Both carry meaning. Build, create, achieve, knowing it won't last forever, but matters deeply right now. As you drift to sleep, hold these lessons. Picture that beautiful city of rings, glowing with crystal light, doomed and glorious simultaneously. Picture yourself in your own life with your own gifts. Are you grateful or proud? Wise or merely clever? Creating meaning or just accumulating power? Atlantis asks, what will you do with your time and opportunities? Will you learn from their mistakes? Will you balance ambition with humility, progress with wisdom, creation with gratitude? Sleep now and dream of crystal lights reflecting in still water. Dream of paradise and its loss. Dream of Atlantis. And wake tomorrow determined to build with wisdom, achieve with humility, create beauty knowing it's temporary, and live well in the time you have. Good night. Remember Atlantis. Remember the lessons written in waves.